So I'm going to walk through, I guess, the process that we followed in one of our recent Viz projects, which is visualizing the State of the Union, which actually just launched over the weekend. So we are actively squashing bugs right now on Slack. We are communicating, trying to squash bugs. But yeah, so we worked with a web dev company from Edmonton called Lift Interactive to reimagine this website, USA Facts. And so USA Facts is a sort of citizen initiative. They're based in Seattle, and their sort of mission is to contribute to factual political discussion in the US. And the big man behind it is Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft and current boss man of Kawhi Leonard, if you did not know. And they are partnered with Wharton University, and Wharton is developing this massive data warehouse that is scraping data from all levels of government in the US, from state and local up to federal. And so USA Facts is kind of the front end for this massive database in the back end. Right, so the new USA Facts secretly launched during the Super Bowl on Sunday so that we could be actively squashing bugs while people were busy watching J-Lo. And we got most of them out of the way. And not only did we rebuild sort of the chart library that's implemented throughout the website, but we got the opportunity to put it to good use for a microsite meant to accompany the State of the Union. And so the State of the Union, the president will be delivering that address tonight, in fact. So that was on purpose. We were launching it at the same time. But the USA Facts State of the Union is meant to be the State of the Union in numbers, or as I like to call it, the state of the onion, because there are so many layers. No? Just a couple Snickers? Come on. Yeah, clapping? Wow. Okay. Well, on to the next one. So in case you didn't know, the relationship with USA Facts was a data visualization relationship. What is this?
That's a good one.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. It's really sad when you have to ask for laughs. It's really sad. So not the fancy novel chart, interactive kind of data viz, that we did do some of that, and we are doing some of that with them. But this was more about the nitty-gritty sort of storytelling aspect of data viz that I think is at the heart of all good data visualization. And so the major challenge with this was information design. And so the goal was to take some sort of 12 areas of interest about the US. So budget, the economy, infrastructure, education, health, crime, and so on and so forth, and go through government data that Wharton is gathering, some of which is really good, some of which is really bad, and put together a bit of a narrative about the state of the US with respect to each of those topics, and to tell a cohesive story about it. So we collaborated really closely with their team because they knew their data really, really well. And we generated some good charts and some boring charts. But overall, I think we ended up with an amazing summary of the US. And we worked with Lyft to get it into what I think is an amazing experience. So we got to, is my mouse on the screen? Is there a hand there? So we got to a place where we kind of had, is it loading? Can't see. Right, so this is just an example of the crime one. So we got to this place where we had this sort of scrolling experience where, oh, you know, crime rates are going down and so on and so forth. And so we educate everybody about whatever we've decided to include in that topic. And then at the end, we kind of threw it together in these sort of big picture-y dashboard type things where user gets the opportunity to kind of unify everything that they've been educated about as they've gone through the topic. Okay, there we are. So yeah, I think they're really amazing. But before we got there, we had to know what we wanted to display. So that was the information design piece of the puzzle. And that was a big journey with their team, because I think behind all of this, like, these are these dashboards, but when I looked through the code and like finally got it on the website, there was something like 200 charts that I had built with like custom database calls, and it was insanity. Probably at the time, but I didn't realize it. But definitely looking back, it was a lot of work. So, you know, typically as an analyst, you get data and you might take it into Excel, or you might take it into R and do a quick plot, or draw up a chart. But there was just so much that it wasn't really feasible to be doing that throughout the process. And moreover, we didn't want to, I think that exercise, well, it's good from an analytical perspective. In this case, we didn't want to focus on the technical element of like, oh, I need to draw this line chart, and like, is this data really recent? And all those sort of questions that you have when you're confronted with like just numbers, looking at numbers. So we wanted to have a more creative process. So instead of doing that, and instead of taking screenshots, and I know that we're going to see something from you as well, we did a bunch of great sketches in advance of this to decide what we wanted to show and what we wanted it to look like. And so the lines are going to be going in the right direction, mostly, if I did a good job. And it really refocused the conversation from the raw data to what is the story we're going to tell, and can we tell it? Am I able to draw, like, can I actually draw a line going up or not? And if not, maybe there's no signal in that data. Maybe we can't tell that story with that chart type or something like that. Yeah, so it was, that sort of sketching stage is invaluable, because you can draw whatever kind of chart you want on paper. Whereas if you're coding, you're like, oh, how am I going to get these like Sankey lines to connect here? And then we have a bar chart, and like, you know, you're dealing with technical problems. But really, you can draw the craziest thing that comes to your mind if you do it on paper. And if you have a decent idea of what the data looks like, you're probably going to be like, yeah, this will work, or not. So I was just going to walk you through sort of where we arrived for these three topics, because I think they turned out really great. So the first one is the economy, and it ended like this, but started like this. And so we have your typical things like GDP and unemployment rate and stuff on this sort of big picture dashboardy thing. But what we really wanted to do with the economy topic was not just talk about those like standard metrics. We wanted to talk about how people are involved in the economy. So what areas are they working? How much money are they making? And how is that changing over time? So we did this bubble chart guy here. Even drew a tooltip in my sketch. These buttons don't work, unfortunately. And so I'll just go here. Yeah, there they are. I was like, no, the charts aren't loading. So that sort of jobs story is what this bubble chart is. So like pretty standard, not a revolutionary chart or anything, but we spent a lot of time when we were drawing things thinking about what we wanted. So the bubbles, the size of the bubble is the GDP for that sector of the economy. I've highlighted ones that are kind of big and where I had room to do it. And the location of the bubble on the x-axis is the number of jobs. So bubbles on this side, on the right, there are more people working in that sector. And the y-axis is wages. So higher bubbles are higher paid sectors. And GDP by sector, when it's calculated, actually has a more substantial labor share. So it's a kind of a reflection of total compensation to employees. So it's not a bad measure of how much money is actually going into pockets of workers in the US for consumption. Hooray! Consume. And so the cool thing about it is we added the play button so you can watch it change over time. So I'll just press play, and there we go. So there are a few things that are really interesting. So number one, you can't really see the trailing shadows on this screen, but you can see it on the TVs. But if you watch manufacturing when we get to the recession, it just like zooms over. So 2 million jobs were lost. The other thing that's really awesome is watch how many jobs are being created in healthcare over the last 15 years. It's like 5 million jobs in the US. That sector is growing. And yeah, so, you know, I made this, and it's a really fascinating and simple graphic that you can just look at, watch it play, think about it. The other aspect of this dashboardy thing, I guess we can just watch manufacturing, is we have sector wages and sector employment to the left, which are actually the axes of the chart as well. So kind of a bit of context for what you're seeing. So pretty cool, I think. So that's the economy, the US economy. Simple. Everybody knows about the US economy. Another one we did was the topic is standard of living. And so this one is meant to be all about income and taxes and government assistance and that sort of thing. And so ended up like this, but started like this. And this one we actually retained a lot of the stuff. The main thing that we wanted to do was draw the US income distribution. And we have another viz that we're kind of working on with USA Facts about this. But there's a lot of discussion about the middle class and the top 1% and all that. And none of that is in the context of what that actually means. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to be like, hey, this is a distribution and this is the middle 20%. And so that was the purpose behind using this distribution. We had to do some sort of crazy things because this goes out forever. Like that distribution just gets bumpy out until you're filthy rich. There are some filthy rich people in the US. So let me just load this guy. So here's what we got. Look here. So yeah, you can see how we have our little segments of the distribution. We kind of shrunk them down and made bigger bin widths so we could fit it all in one space. But I think it's still pretty effective. And a couple cool things about this. First USA fact, 8.1% of people filing their taxes in 2017 in the US filed a loss. So when you hear about the bottom 20% or the middle 20%, all of that research that's done by very smart economists and the Congressional Budget Office and stuff in the US, they actually include those negative incomes. And those are just business owners and self-employed people. So maybe you started a business on the last day of your fiscal year and bought a truck and you have a $40,000 loss that you file. So that might be someone. But actually, some of those people are quite wealthy and they might have a bad year. And in reality, that probably includes a lot of these people in the 0 to 10K bin, because maybe their accountant wasn't good enough to get them below the 0 line. So we did this, and then we have these fancy tooltips that highlight the sections of the distribution. Another USA fact, the top 20% of US earners, households, pays 67% of all taxes in the US. Isn't that insane? And the top 1% pays 24% of all taxes. Nuts. So down below here, we have sort of a summary of that tax information, and we also have these assistance and taxes as a percentage of income. So these guys, the bottom 20%, their sort of effective rate is that 91.9% of their income comes from government assistance. Okay, that's standard of living. Last but not least is budget. So ended up like this, but started like this. And I really just wanted to include this one to demonstrate to you my inability to draw a Sankey diagram by hand. But it worked. It's a bit of a blob. Nonetheless, and this one is also a good example of kind of the experience that was constructed on the web with Lyft. And so this is kind of the thing that we wanted. So, you learn about how much government is getting in revenue. That chart sticks. You get your next story point. Move on. Some statistics. Revenue, spending, deficit, and debt. And yeah, same idea. Put this together in a bit of a dashboard type thing at the end, and sort of contextualize these large numbers in terms of the per person amount that the government is getting in revenue or spending. And that's it. I mean, there are 12 more. If you really want to learn about the US, you should go and check it out. I know more about the US than I ever would have imagined now. And I guess kind of the point of the whole thing is that early sort of sketching design phase is invaluable when you're trying to put together a product like this, because it refocuses your attention on that story element, which is really, really important. Because if you don't have a story, then you just have a bunch of charts and noise. And that's it. So, questions?
So we got about 3 or 4 minutes to ask questions. So if you put your hand up, I'll walk with you to you, and I'll give you the mic so that our people at home can hear the question.
Hi. Was the same level of information available for Canada as well?
Yeah, I have no idea. I would say that, there are some differences, obviously. There's a great deal of this information available for Canada, but things like that income distribution, that actually, so there's an economist that works with us from USA Facts, and that actually is a fancy combination of this IRS public use file and the US Census. And so there's some fancy analysis where you're like running a regression on both and doing a bit of a fuzzy join to get all of that information together. So I'm not sure if there's an equivalent for something like that for Canada.
Just an anecdote. I sent this to the Chief Statistician of Canada yesterday because we're excited about it. I said, this is very similar to what we discussed a month ago. He goes, well, it's some similarities, but there's a lot of differences, Craig. He was very clear to say we're not like the U.S. So,
thanks for sharing the visualization.
John, yeah, it's just for down there.
Thanks for sharing all those visualizations with us. I'm interested in the back end. Like, obviously, there's going to be more data next year. Did you build all kind of a infrastructure to manage the data and update the data and clean the data and integrate the data and summarize the data?
Thank you.
Yeah. So that Wharton database is effectively the back end. So there's the Wharton database that is continually scraping data from all levels of government, and that stays up to date, and they monitor that and make sure it's as clean as can be. And then serving the actual charts online, there's another sort of like production database that we use. But that is all pipelined and easy to update as things.
So when you showed it to us, it was very dynamic. It wasn't based on some summary tables that give you BAM, super deluxe response?
So the production database is fast and reflects the data as of the last time they migrated from Wharton, but that's a sort of regular exercise.
So I like your process of sketching it up, and people can remember. I remember the days we used to use whatever stickies to mock up, various different application screens and stuff. What I keep hearing from our quote unquote developers and whatnot is, well, I have these tools, whether it be a Power BI, a Tableau, a MicroStrategy, whatever it is, I can just whip these up really quickly. And they quickly get lost in the data, and they miss the fact of what they're trying to convey. And likewise, if they're trying to create some custom, or Python visual, the same thing you alluded to. So I really like your strategy of mocking that up. And I think that would be really good because you can have a conversation with your stakeholders about this, even though the shape of the curve might not necessarily be ideal.
Sure. And it just, it's just by virtue of how you've done it, it's not done yet. So it's like officially not done yet. It's just a sketch. So there's the stress that people feel when you show them something that's a half-built dashboard is like, oh my gosh, look at all the things you've missed, or you haven't done this, you haven't done that, and you're like, oh, and then you get this infinite bug list that is stuff that you were planning to do already, and preempting that by having something simpler is a good idea.
Okay, we'll call it there. We started a bit late, so I'll give you a bit more time, Craig, but we need to save time. So Craig will be around after. If you have more questions after the next talk, both speakers will be around, and you can come up and ask them one-on-one. So thank you, Craig. Good job.